And then everything was silent. Uncertain future. Uncertain future.
Increase by 5%. And that is why I predict our sales will increase by 5% in the next quarter. If only James was as easy to predict, huh? Okay, I have to go get dressed right now. But I love you. You're the only man for me. Go ahead. I'm 35, Jess. All my friends are married. Time is running out. Matt and I are just friends. Why does everyone keep asking about him? Can't a guy and a girl just be
Friends. Kelly and I are just friends that give each other advice. You know, we both haven't been in a relationship in at least 10 years, so we get together every
weak in the knees? If I don't feel that, then it's a bad sign. All I want is someone who is caring, meticulously clean.
Funny, generous, honest.
Honestly, Jessica, if a guy touches your hair, that's a surefire sign that he likes you. Really? I need a guy's perspective.
It's pointless, so I asked Kelly. You know, we talk about dates, give each other advice. Fair to
Put my hands. I never know what to do with my hands, and my tongue feels like 10 times as
beginning to think that I'm still
not
ready. Come on, you're not gonna be an old cat lady.
I already am. I just wish I knew what all these signs mean. Oh, wow. They really take great care of each other.
Yeah.
I can't even keep a plant alive. I'm never gonna find that.
I take it last night wasn't.
It's a long story. I reach for the dinner menu and he stops me.
I'll have that one there. Thank you very much.
Okay.
She'll have the citrus salad.
All right.
Okay, we'll go light on the dressing, possibly on the side, and then we'll swap out the feta cheese for the blue cheese.
What kind of sign is that?
Well,
Yeah.
citrus means he thinks you're exotic. And blue cheese,
Yeah.
well, that means
Yeah.
he thinks you smell like stinky feet.
You're the worst.
Matt?
One iced upside down soy caramel macchiato, extra caramel?
Oh, why, thank you. I was gonna order one before work.
Yeah, well, you know, now you don't have to.
Okay, so was he being rude or nice? You know, he didn't even ask me what I wanted. Part of me thinks it's classy, but dressing on the side? Is he calling me fat? So most of the time he looked back at me with great eye contact, even raising an eyebrow here and there, and that's a sign that he's into me. But then other times I would look at him and he'd like quickly look away, and that's a sign that he's not into me. Like maybe he's a little shy. I also read that when a guy looks left, then looks at your face, and then looks right, that's not a good sign. So his hands were pointed at me, but his feet weren't. He straightened his hair and he yawned a lot, but he also fidgeted a lot, took these deep breaths, and also had this like nervous, funny laugh. So was he nervous because he's interested or because he wanted to be out of the situation?
Where have you been getting your info?
These are signs. Later, he drops me off at home. We're on my porch. I had a really good time.
Yeah, I had a really, really good time.
Thank you.
Yeah,
Good.
yeah.
And then he leaned in, so I hugged him and tried to kiss him, only to look down and see that he was reaching to pet my cat. And then he looked surprised or scared or happy, and he said thanks, and I said, ta-da!
Thank you.
You're welcome.
Thank you so much.
You're welcome.
Okay. Good. Good night.
Have fun. Why did I salute him,
I
Matt?
don't know.
Oh, and have fun? Have fun with what? Have fun with your drive home? Have fun never calling me again? Have fun, walking through doors properly? I was up late thinking about this. So I needed coffee to get me to the coffee shop so I could get more coffee so that I'm awake for my presentation at work today. I just wish I knew what these signs mean. They have it all figured out. What are you doing?
This is gold. This is pure gold. Oh,
What are you?
shh. This is a sign.
It is?
Yeah. That if it wasn't for me, you'd look like a doofus for your presentation.
Yeah. I should go. I should get going.
What? Are you sure? I mean, you got plenty of time.
Oh, yeah. Thanks, Matt. Thanks. I just
Okay.
Bye.
Yeah, you gotta. It's a door.
Is it a sign?
Signs, signs, signs. Everywhere we go, there are signs. Down the highway, to the grocery store, to the airport, to the ball game, there are signs everywhere we go. Look up in the sky, you see clouds, it's a sign of what's coming tonight. I even read just recently that if you run into a skunk, his tail shoots up in the air and he stamps his front feet, that's a sign. Time to head out of there. Signs everywhere. Or even in human relationships, signs. She's playing with her hair. What does that mean? He's talking overly loud. What does that mean? He's leaning against the wall. Does that mean something? Every time I walk in, she leaves. Is that a sign? Everywhere we go, signs. The question becomes, how do we interpret the signs and what do we do about the signs? Well, maybe the most important place of all is signs when it comes to the second coming of Jesus. A lot of signs. You could probably recite some of them by memory. What do we do with the signs? How do we understand them? How do we respond? It's an important part of who we are and what we are. We've responded to the signs in different ways throughout our history. You have responded maybe in different ways throughout your own life. You see some signs, and so you try to be perfect. You see some signs, you try to make sure there's no sin left in your life. You see some signs, so you come to church. You see some, well, you get the picture. We've responded in many different ways to signs, but the question is, what is a healthy, balanced, biblical way to respond? That's a really important question. Because some of the ways we've responded to this concept that Jesus is coming again, a friend of mine calls the days of adrenaline approach. That something happens and there's a surge, a jolt of adrenaline that goes through us. I have come to call it eschatological caffeine. Now, just in case you're not familiar with that word eschatological, it has to do with the last things, the end time. Eschatological caffeine. You know how caffeine works in our system. I saw a meme on my Twitter feed just the other day. Had a picture of a tazir. It's a little animal. You may not be familiar with it. It looks kind of like a little squirrel, except it has these immense eyes, just huge eyes. The eyes seem to totally cover its face. This is a picture of a tazir from up close. He's just staring at you, big eyes. And the caption says, this morning, instead of water, I put Red Bull in my coffee. And now I can see noises. Well, that's what it does to you. It gets you hyped up. It gets the adrenaline coursing through your veins. It keeps you awake. Sometimes that's the way we've responded to the signs. Is we've watched, we've seen something happen in the world, and suddenly it's as though we have drunk a grande cup of eschatological caffeine and we're ready to go. Our spiritual life comes alive. Our eyes pop open. Now we want to be ready. But the problem is, the same thing happens spiritually that happens physically when caffeine wears off. We crash. We're in worse shape than we were before. The question becomes, how do we respond in a way that doesn't involve eschatological caffeine? It's a key question. After all, we're Adventists. We believe in the advent of Jesus. Our very movement was born among people who had this deep, passionate desire to be with Jesus, to encounter him, to go home with him. That's been in fact, our name, Adventist, comes from that reality. So it's not a stretch for me to say this morning, I don't think I'm the only one in this congregation who would say, Jesus, it's time. Please, put an end to this divided, deeply hostile, angry, bitter planet and usher in a kingdom of peace and love. Even so, come, Lord Jesus. But I also don't think I'm the only one who says there must be a better way to respond to the signs. There must be a better way to live in readiness than what we have at times done. So that's why we turn this camp meeting series to that issue, to that question. We go to Matthew 24 and 25. About 16 years ago, we spent some time looking at Matthew 24 and 25, and then a 3 months ago up in the mountains, our staff decided, let's go back there. The world is in such a condition that people are worried, asking questions. So back we go to Matthew 24 and 25, a fresh study of which has reminded me of why these chapters are so important. The most extensive words Jesus ever spoke about his coming, the end of the world, and preparation for it. So Matthew 24. We're going to read some verses that give us kind of an overview of the early part of that chapter. We're going to talk about signs. But we begin at the Jewish temple. That structure, that edifice that was so grand and glorious, built of such immense stones that no one could imagine that it would ever be torn down. And that leads to a conversation between Jesus and his disciples. Matthew chapter 24, I start reading in verse 1. Jesus left the temple and was walking away when his disciples came up to him to call his attention to its buildings. Do you see all these things, he asked? Truly I tell you, not one stone here will be left on another. Every one will be thrown down. As Jesus was sitting on the Mount of Olives, the disciples came to him privately. Tell us, they said, when will this happen? And what will be the sign of your coming and of the end of the age? Right away, we can see from the disciples' question that they believe those two events are one. And that's understandable. It's understandable in the Jewish mind of that day and time to think if the temple is destroyed, then everything must be over. If it gets to that point, then there's no way history can go on. And so Jesus begins his answer. It's a bit confusing because he seems to not clarify whether or not they are different realities. Verse 4, Jesus answered, watch out that no one deceives you. For many will come in my name claiming I am the Messiah and will deceive many. You will hear of wars and rumors of wars, but see to it that you are not alarmed. Such things must happen, but the end is still to come. Nation will rise against nation and kingdom against kingdom. There will be famines and earthquakes in various places. All these are the beginnings of birth pains. Then you will be handed over to be persecuted and put to death, and you will be hated by all nations because of me. At that time, many will turn away from the faith and will betray and hate each other, and many false prophets will appear and deceive many people. Because of the increase of wickedness, the love of most will grow cold. But whoever stands firm to the end will be saved. And this gospel of the kingdom will be preached in the whole world as a testimony to all nations, and then the end will come. You see, as Jesus speaks, How easy it is to begin to ask the question, are you talking about the end of the world and your coming, or are you talking about the destruction of Jerusalem? In that section, his primary focus seems to be on his coming and the end of the world. But then starting with verse 15, he seems to move back to the destruction of Jerusalem, only to once again end up talking about the end of the world. Verse 15. So when you see standing in the holy place the abomination that causes desolation, spoken of through Daniel the prophet, let the reader understand, then let those who are in Judea flee to the mountains. Let no one on the housetop go down to take anything out of the house. Let no one in the field go back to get their cloak. How dreadful it will be in those days for pregnant women and nursing mothers. Pray that your flight will not take place in winter or on the Sabbath. For then there will be great distress, unequal from the beginning of the world until now, and never to be equaled again. If those days had not been cut short, no one would survive. But for the sake of the elect, those days will be shortened. At that time, if anyone says to you, look, here's the Messiah, or there he is, do not believe it. For false messiahs and false prophets will appear and perform great signs and wonders to deceive, if possible, even the elect. See, I have told you ahead of time. Once again, there's some uncertainty. Which is he talking about? He begins by, we're thinking, the destruction of Jerusalem. He ends up with the coming. He will then go on from that point in the chapter to talk about the manner of his coming. The lightning shines from the east to the west, he says, such will my coming be. He talks about the nature of the world at the time of his coming, as in the days of Noah. And he talks about the unpredictable time when he will arrive. No one knows the day or the hour. It all serves to create anxiety. Serves to underline the importance of the signs. If no one knows, then we better watch the signs. It underlines that. But it still creates questions. What then do we conclude? How do we summarize it all? Well, I think the words of Jesus do the best job, starting in verse 42, where he says, as a result of all of this, he says, therefore, keep watch, because you do not know on what day your Lord will come. But understand this, if the owner of the house had known at what time of the night the thief was coming, he would have kept watch and would not have let his house be broken into. So you also must be ready, because the Son of Man will come at an hour when you do not expect him. Signs, signs, signs. In the political world, on the international scene, in the natural world, in the spiritual world, all kinds of signs. Our question is, how do we understand them? How are we to respond to the signs? The truth is, two things make it complicated. One, already mentioned, is the fact that he combines both the signs of the destruction of Jerusalem with the signs of the end of the world. And it makes it confusing. Which are we talking about here, Jesus? And the second problem, let's be honest about this, the kinds of signs that he gives are signs that have happened from the day he spoke the words until now. They've happened all along. There have always been wars, always rumors of wars, always earthquakes, always spiritual persecution. That has always been present. How then are we to understand the signs? Whether we're talking about signs in interpersonal relationships, signs in the store, or signs in the book, we better know how to understand and respond. So let's talk about those two challenges. Challenge number one. Jesus, are you talking about the destruction of Jerusalem, or are you talking about the end of the world? New Testament scholar Michael Wilkins actually provides us some help with that. Listen to what Wilkins says about that reality in this chapter and these signs. He writes, there is a comprehensive theological cohesion in the discourse between Jesus' treatment of the fall of Jerusalem and his coming. But there is no clear dividing point between the two. The resolution is that the two are purposely intertwined under what some call a double reference prophecy or prophetic foreshortening, where a near series of events serves as a partial fulfillment and symbol for the fulfillment of far events. So what he's saying, Wilkins, is that Jesus is purposeful. Think about it this way. Picture in your mind's eye, and it will come up on the screen, a circle. A circle in which is contained the material that Jesus has to say about the destruction of Jerusalem. There's a circle there. So within that is that material. But what Jesus has to say about the destruction of Jerusalem happens against a much larger backdrop, a much bigger circle. In that circle, he discussed the realities that have to do with his coming and with the end of the world. Now, when we look at those two circles head on, they look to be one and the same. That is exactly how the disciples would likely have taken it because of what we said earlier. There was a sense in which the destruction of Jerusalem and the end of the world must be the same thing. But if we turn them sideways, suddenly we realize there's a distance, there's a space between them. How big that space is, we don't know. How big is the space between one and the other? Is it a short space, or is it a much longer space between the two? There's uncertainty. There are questions about that. Jesus, in talking about the two, recognizes that there will be many realities that are similar in the case of the destruction of Jerusalem and the end of the world, and so he weaves them together. But he must have recognized, though in this chapter he says no one knows the day or the hour, he must have recognized that there would be a space, a time. Is it short? No, we know that because we're here 2,000 years later. It is much longer. How long? We don't know. And thus the importance of the signs. The signs are there to help us understand something about this journey from now to the establishment of the kingdom. That's the first challenge we face. But the second challenge we face is, what do we make of the signs? I want you to picture in your mind's eye that we're taking a trip. We're taking a trip from Loma Linda to Phoenix, Arizona. As we're taking this trip, there are going to be some different kinds of signs that appear along the way. If we have kids in the car, they're going to be asking almost before we get out of the driveway, are we there yet? Are we there yet? And so we're watching for a certain kinds of signs. Sign comes up, 175 miles to Phoenix. No, we're not there yet. It's going to be a while. Another sign comes up, 120 miles to Phoenix, 102 miles to Phoenix, 60 miles to Phoenix. And each time the signs come up, we are able to say, this is how much further it will be till we get to our destination. Phoenix, 20 miles. And we realize we're almost there. That's the kind of sign we have thought Jesus speaks of in this chapter. We have thought, when we see these signs, we're getting closer, we're almost there. That's the kind of sign that we have had in mind when he talks about the signs of his coming. But that's problematic. That's not the kind of sign he has in mind. It has led us to prepare for his coming by drinking grande cups of eschatological caffeine. Because every time something happens in the Middle East, something happens in D.C., something happens in Rome, something happens in California, suddenly we're certain it's right upon us. And everybody jumps awake. It's time to get ready. But that's not the kind of sign that Jesus offers us here in this chapter. I want to read a text that helps us understand the second kind of sign that he presents. I want to go back to Matthew 24 and reread verse 8. Notice this brief verse that's tucked away in the material that we already read. Matthew 24 and verse 8, just after he has given the signs in the physical, natural, and political world, he then says, all these are the beginning of birth pains. All of those events, those cataclysmic events, national, international, spiritual, the beginning of birth pains. I want to go back to that trip to Phoenix. Suppose Suppose we're on our way to Phoenix. We've never driven that road before. We're going together, but in the car, we have a woman who is pregnant, very advanced in her pregnancy. She's going to Phoenix because in Phoenix is the hospital where she is to give birth and the doctor that she wants to deliver her baby. We all get in the car. No sooner do we get in the car than boom, labor begins. Now, right at that moment, we're thinking, whoa, wait a minute. We got a 5-6 hour, well, maybe now it's a 3.5, 4 hour drive. We've got to drive. This trip just changed in nature. As she begins to groan and to hang on to people around her and to slap her husband, we suddenly realize this is going to be a very long trip. Now maybe that doesn't work for all of us. It's the image that Jesus used, the metaphor that he had in mind. But let's change the metaphor so that all of us can be on board with what he means. Suppose the same trip, the same car, except when we get in, instead of a pregnant woman going into labor, what we have is a gentleman who realizes he's got to pass a kidney stone. And it's not going to happen till he gets to Phoenix. Now he's weeping and sweating and screaming, "Are we there yet?" That's the nature of the entire journey. That's what the whole process is going to look like. It's going to be difficult. It's going to be tough. It's going to be painful. We're going to wonder how much further. And because of how hard it is going to be, Jesus gives us signs. Not signs that tell us how far it is to our destination. He gives us a different kind of sign. It's the same kind of sign we might look for on the freeway when there's sweating and screaming and pain going on. There's the question, are we on the right road? Are you sure we're on the right? How do you know we're on the right road? And then suddenly, I know, there it is. Look, there's a sign. 10, blue sign, white numbers. Says we're still on the right journey. Doesn't tell us anything about how far it is to the destination, but it does tell us, stay the course. You're on your journey. You're headed to the right place. In other words, what Jesus is talking about is not so much the quantity of time that would pass between when he spoke the words and when he would reappear. Not so much the quantity of time, but about the quality of time. This is the kind of time that will pass on this journey to the kingdom. It will be so difficult, so hard. It will remind you of a woman moaning and screaming in labor, waiting to be delivered. It will cause you to wonder, has he forgotten us? Are we going to blow ourselves up before we ever get to the coming? Is nature finally going to end in its last gasps of pollution? And Jesus says, no. In fact, when you see those things happen, let them tell you we're on the right road. Interstate 10. We're taking the correct journey. Which leads us to the lesson of the sign. I would suggest that what Jesus is telling us by the kind of signs that he gives us is that he wants us to live a lifestyle of readiness. A lifestyle of readiness. No eschatological caffeine here. That leads to peaks and valleys. As one New Testament scholar says it, it leads from depression to giddiness and then back to depression again. Rather than that, says Jesus, I want you to live a lifestyle of readiness, recognizing all around you that there are signs that tell you you're still on the right road. The kingdom is up ahead. I think of a story. I like this story. Do you remember the story Robbie Robbins, U.S. Air Force pilot in Iraq, flown 300 missions before finally the war came to a conclusion and things were ending, and they sent him home. Surprisingly, he and his crew, from one day to the next, you're going home. So he didn't tell his family. He wanted to surprise them. They made the long flight home, landed in Massachusetts. Several of them who had a similar destination got in a car, drove to Pennsylvania. They arrived at Robbins' house early one morning, eager to surprise his wife and kids. Got out of the car knowing that they were probably just getting up, getting ready for school and work. But there out on front of the house was a big sign that said, "Welcome home, Dad." Did somebody let out the secret? I want to read you Robin's words as he relates what happened. When I walked into the house, he says, the kids, about half dressed for school, screamed, "Daddy!" Susan came running down the hall. She looked terrific. Hair fixed, makeup on, a crisp yellow dress. "How did you know?" I asked. "I didn't," she answered through tears of joy. "But once we knew the war was over, we knew you'd be home one of these days. We knew you'd try to surprise us. So we were ready every day." That's Jesus. That's what he's saying. Don't live a life driven by eschatological caffeine, by ups and downs and an unhealthy approach to your spiritual journey. Live a lifestyle of readiness, recognizing that in all the troubles of the world, he said, that's what the journey will be like. Tough, in labor. But because of the faithfulness of our God, the journey will one day end. We'll be home. And we can today be ever ready for that moment.